have with us Dr. Ann Speckhard, who is currently serving as an adjunct associate professor of psychiatry in the School of Medicine at Georgetown University and is the director of the International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism. She served also as an adjunct professor, associate professor in the Security Studies Department in the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, teaching the Psychology of Terrorism course. Dr. Speckhard has been working in the field of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, since the 1980s and has extensive experience working in Europe, the Middle East, and the former Soviet Union. She was the chair of the NATO Human Factors and Medicine Research and Technology Experts Group on the psychosocial, cultural, and organizational aspects of terrorism. She served as the co-chair of the NATO Russian Human Factors and Medicine Research Task Group on social sciences, support to military personnel engaged in counterinsurgency and counterterrorism operations. And she served on the NATO Human Factors and Medicine Research Task Group, Moral Dilemmas, and Military Mental Health Outcomes. She is a member of the UN roster of experts for the Terrorism Prevention Branch, Office on Drugs and Crime, and was previously awarded a Public Health Service Fellowship in the United States Department of Health and Human Services, where she served as a research fellow. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Speckhard.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
I'm kind of excited, so bear with me if I get too excited because I have been hoping to have you on for quite a while. I've been the Investigative Project on Terrorism regularly has been sharing your work for a while, and every time I've gotten a hold of one of those pieces, I've really thoroughly enjoyed the amount of detail that goes into it that I unfortunately don't always find in other articles. But I like how you summarize things. I should say not summarize. You don't. You provide all the angles, is what I'm trying to say, and not enough people do that. So. One of the reasons I have enjoyed reading your research over the years is your explicit detail that reveals more thought behind a problem that most people think exists. The article you and Molly Ellenberg wrote on repatriation of ISIS children starts by examining the real issues. I like that you and Ms. Ellenberg state ISIS children did not, at least initially, voluntarily join the ISIS caliphate. They were either brought or born into the terrorist group by their parents who served ISIS in various capacities. Some teenagers also traveled to and joined ISIS of their own volition, but even these must be considered for repatriation in terms of their level of maturity and understanding at the time they undertook to do so. So Dr. Speckhard, you divide these children up to properly examine the issues. Would you please explain to our audience how and why you separate these different groups of children so you can truly examine the issues here?
Sure. There's a number of categories. I mean, you can divide them in a zillion ways, but the way that we divided them was to look at the really young children. I mean, there's an age where you don't even conceptually understand what ISIS is. And, you know, probably from 7 and under, you know, you could train a kid to hold a gun. But, you know, do they really understand who the enemy is and who to shoot and how to shoot? They're basically just little kids. And they probably are traumatized from having lived inside of ISIS, and they're traumatized from their experiences in the camps. And the ISIS enforcers in the camps are definitely trying to get their tentacles into these kids and turn them into ideologically committed older children. But right now, they're just little kids, and kids are malleable, adaptive, and if they were brought home and fed well, put in school, put with social services, I mean, basically a 360 around them, and put in a good family environment, whether it was their ISIS mother coming home with them and being judged as a good mother, or with the grandparents, or with foster parents, or with an adoptive family. But put in a good situation, they're probably going to be fine. They're going to need some counseling, for sure. Then there's older kids, and you can look in the age range of probably 7 to 12, that ISIS, when they had them in the Cubs of the Caliphate, those kids were trained in weapons, and they were punished severely if they didn't go along with things. But they're like kids when we see child soldiers. We've seen child soldiers all through Africa. And when they get demobilized, even though maybe they had to kill someone to prove their loyalty to the group when they were kidnapped into it or coerced into it somehow, good trauma treatment and good reintegration into the community and acceptance can heal them also. We know that. And little kids that were in the Cubs of the Caliphate were basically trained to be preachers, trained to be spies, and they were trained to be suicide bombers. They were told, you'll go immediately to paradise. And that can be untrained. If you learn an ideology, you can unlearn it. And we have examples of that. We make counter-narrative videos from our interviews of all the ISIS people that I've interviewed, and that's 240 at this point. And one of them is of a 13-year-old. Well, he was 15 when we interviewed him, but 13 at the time that he was signed up to be a suicide bomber. And he said when he got out of ISIS, his parents found out about it when he was sent home on leave before his mission. And when he was sent home, they sent him into Turkey. And he said it took him a year to get out of that ISIS mentality because they had so brainwashed him. But he did get out of it. And he understood the horror of it and that they had convinced him that this was a grand and glorious thing to do that he should be happy about. And at the point that he was talking to us, he was calling ISIS infidels. And you can watch his video. It's on our YouTube channel, and I can give you the link to put with this podcast if you want.
Definitely.
But then there's older kids, and I don't know exactly where we would cut the line for them, but there are cases where 17-year-olds have been tried in court as adults, and there are 17-year-olds that were forced to behead. There are 17-year-olds that were fighting as soldiers. My view is if they were a minor at the time they joined ISIS, we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. And, you know, maybe you're going to prosecute them and put them in a prison for some time, but we have to have some leniency toward them and put them into treatment programs because they were minors when they joined. But of course, these kids are more dangerous. And then we can go into ethnicities. We have the Yazidi boys who were, when ISIS took over the Yazidi area in Iraq, they basically rounded people up. They took the women and girls, and they took them to be slaves. So they enslaved these women and girls, even young girls. And the men, they told them to put their arms up. And if they had armpit hair, they were taken off and slaughtered. And the idea was, these guys can fight us and let's kill them. The younger boys who were aware of all of this, can you imagine the trauma of that? They were taken to be slaves as well. They were enslaved, but they were put in the Cubs of the Caliphate. And in the Cubs of the Caliphate, they were forced to weapons train. They were forced to follow a very brutal regime. They were told that the Yazidis are Satan worshipers. And these are kids from 7 to 18, or even 6. And they were told, I'm sorry.
Do you see any surprise in this? That, I mean, they're basically recreating the Janissaries. I don't know if you guys, if you're writer, thought about that.
Yeah, you could say it's creating the Janissaries, but I think Janissaries, well, my understanding of them is that they took the smartest kids and they tried to nurture them to be part of this Ottoman Empire. I mean, the parents didn't like it, but it wasn't being trained to hate your family and to want to kill your family and to kill your whole ethnic group and to train to be killers. So what we found with these Yazidi boys, my opinion of them, is they're the most dangerous. They were the most highly traumatized. They were brainwashed into believing the ISIS ideology. They were told, if you go on a suicide mission, you go immediately to paradise. And imagine if your mother's been taken away from you, your sisters have been taken away from you, if you have any inkling that they're being mass raped, if your brothers, older brothers, and your father and your uncle and your grandfather were all murdered, if somebody tells you, all you have to do is push this button and you'll go to Jannah, and it will be wonderful for you, of course these kids volunteered. And that's what we were told by Syrian ISIS members. They said those Yazidi boys were some of the most fierce fighters. And we also know Nadia Murad, the Nobel Prize winner, said that she's got a nephew that was still with ISIS, and she managed to talk to him by telephone, and he said, if I ever see you, I'll kill you. I mean, he's just totally been turned against his own ethnic roots. So when these kids are brought home to their mothers, when they're repatriated, if the mothers themselves are carrying traumas of being raped, and then they have this aggressive kid that doesn't really know his own ethnicity, know his own place in society, they have a really hard time together. And those ones need very special care. I mean, they're the worst victims, and they've been taught to be very aggressive.
One of the things that I caught here is that you actually, one of those different classes or groups of people you talked about is the Yazidi women who were due to rape or something else by one of these ISIS jihadis. If a child is born, I mean, you talked about how ethnicity issues or nationality issues are a huge piece.
Well, that's the last category. And the last category is there's all kinds of children that were born from rape. So in Iraq, citizenship is conferred by being born to an Iraqi. And, but on your passport, you're labeled according to your religion. And the Yazidi ethnic group doesn't allow intermarriage, and they're very closed group. So they've told the women, you cannot bring your children back here. And then on top of that, Iraq labels them as Muslim because their fathers were Muslim. So this is a complete anathema to that closed group. So the women are put in this terrible situation. If they want to go home to their families, if they want to recover from being gang raped, from being forced to be slaves, and if they've born children from these rapes, they have to give up their children. And so there's children in Mosul in the orphanages, there's children in Syria in the orphanages, and then there's women that stay among the ISIS women in Camp al-Hol because they don't want to leave their children. So they pretend that they're with ISIS instead of that they were a victim of ISIS. And it's heartbreaking in every way. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard of a woman that wanted to give up her child. So the solutions for them are to repatriate them to a third country and get them so that they can go with their children and that they can have a support network around them to get over what happened to them.
My only question on that group is there a way to identify Yazidi women that would, I think that would be difficult. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's the only question I have about, would there be a way we could identify the Yazidi women?
Well, there are some in Camp al-Hol, and I've been asked to try to go and interview them. And I was told that they are not allowed to leave al-Hol. And when I asked about it to the people running the camp and so on, they said, oh no, there's Yazidi women here that are hiding here. And they don't want anybody to know they're Yazidi because they face this horrible choice if they want to leave. So it's not like they're committed to ISIS, but they're committed to their own children. And it is possible to hide in Camp al-Hol because it's huge and it's understaffed. And I don't know if anybody would force them to leave anyway if they didn't want to.
I was wondering if there would be a way that, I mean, I understand the need to hide to protect your child. That makes a lot of sense to me. But if, let's say somebody like you was in there interviewing and was able to identify them based on certain, I hate the word standards in this issue, but certain identifiers that you could use. It sounds horrible in many ways what we're talking about, but if there was a way to identify them in particular, to exclude the women who were pro-ISIS, maybe that something could be done then. I honestly have no answers, but
Well, if
that's my thought process.
yeah, I mean, we're already seeing it that the SDF started to do a registration in Al Hol and try to figure out exactly who they have in that camp and where they're staying and what sector of the camp and what tent, and you know, if they put their resources into it, it's not hard to figure out who's who. I mean, there's women that have walked away from ISIS 1-2 years ago that are in that camp that probably can tell you the who's who of everybody. I mean, they know who are the dangerous women, and that's why if you want to do any rehabilitation with these women, before you bring them home, if you want to do it in Al Hol or Al Roj, you have to create some separation so that the ISIS enforcers don't have the power to punish. Because right now they'll do things like, they all have knives because they cook for themselves. I mean, it's said to be a refugee camp, but it's not a refugee camp, it's a prison. And, but as a refugee camp, they get food, they cook their food, so they cut it with knives. So they all have knives, they've stabbed each other. They all have cooking fuel, so they use the fuel to pour it on somebody's tent that has walked away from ISIS and started on fire, with or without the people inside. They've stabbed the Asayesh and the guards. I mean, there's all kinds of really nasty things. They throw rocks. Lisa Smith told me that her baby was laying on a blanket and someone threw a rock into her tent and it missed her baby by centimeters and would have killed her baby. And
Scary stuff.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You, in your article, you talk about 50% of the total population of, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right, Camp Raj, is that how you would say that?
Camp Roj.
Roj, okay. You said 50% are wives and children of foreign terrorist fighters, but what about Camp Hol?
Wait a second. Oh, I'm sorry. What is the quote? 50% in?
Yeah, you said in camp, 50% of the total population of Camp Raj are wives and children of FTFs.
Okay, the Camp Hol is broken into sectors. So there's an Iraqi and Syrian sector. And at one point there were 60,000 families there, and there are men there too. And they have started doing releases. So they release them to the Syrian tribes, and they also send them back to Iraq. So those numbers may have gone down, but among the foreign women and children, there's 8,000. And so they're from Australia, Indonesia, Maldives, Belgium, France, Turkey. You know, it's the United Nations when you go into those camps and prisons.
It doesn't seem like an easy way to communicate with so many different languages also.
Well, a lot of them speak Arabic somewhat, and then, you know, they stick to their groups.
That, wow. The amount of language is here, so we're talking, yeah, that's, I understand the Arabic being, would probably be the main tongue used, but I just think that's got to be interesting.
Well, we face that when we go to do our interviews. So at one point I was traveling with someone that could speak the Balkan languages. I had someone that could speak French and Arabic, and then my Russian, I found out it still survived and I could do an interview in Russian and English, of course. So we had all those languages. But one time we had a Dutch girl that agreed to an interview, but she only could speak Dutch. So or same thing with German. And one time we interviewed a guy from the prison that his language was Bahasa, but he spoke Arabic to our translator, and the translator said afterwards, "You have to pay me double because I can now speak Bahasa as well." because, you know, he would speak Arabic, but he'd intersperse Bahasa words wherever he, you know, so it's kind of like Franglish.
Oh yes, I have I've been working in education for a long time, and I've been working with kids who have English as a second language, and I see that kind of thing all the time where they intersperse different words. Oh my gosh, yeah. Communication has got to, while I was reading your article, it was one of the things I was thinking about. I mean, just looking at the little videos you did. Now these are, I say little videos, they're short videos. And I will tell you, I'm going to put this link up and I'm going to post it underneath so everybody can see it, because these are powerful videos. They're very brief, but they are totally important because they're done in so many different languages, and they're powerful. Each one is powerful. You have to see them to understand what I'm saying.
Thank you, Paul. Maybe we should explain that the project that we run at International Center for the Study of Violent Extremism takes a team. I'm the head of it, but we're all working together. So I go do the interviews, and they're 45 minutes to 5-hour long interviews. And they're as in-depth as I possibly can get with the person in the time that I'm given with them. And I ask them questions of who they were as a child, who they were before they ever heard about ISIS, why they thought about going to Syria, how they ended up in ISIS itself, how they traveled, who facilitated it, what happened when they arrived, what job they got, where they lived, what they loved about ISIS, what they hated about ISIS. If they tried to defect, how did they get out? Or, you know, what were their thwarted attempts? Were they ever punished by ISIS? Did they see punishments? Did they see the Yazidis? And if they're in prison, how do they feel about that? And what do they hope for the future? Do they want to go home? All these kind of questions. And do they have advice for others? So out of this 1 to 5 hour interview, we then retranslate it when we get home so that it's a good translation. And our very talented video editors, Zach Badorf and Sheikh Ali, cut them, and we cut them to 1 minute to 5 minute videos. And then it's a talking head. So it's like listening to me talk. You know, you're seeing a face and a person, but some of these people want their face blurred because they're scared. And so we decided to illustrate them with ISIS's video. So we take, well, if they talk about I grew up in Belgium, we take some scenes from Belgium from the internet. And then we take scenes from ISIS actual video recording almost everything they did. And when they talk about whatever they experienced in ISIS that we decide to put in that 5 minutes, we illustrate it. And at some point you see their face briefly talking or a blurred face. And then at the very end, you hear their advice. Don't join ISIS. ISIS is corrupt. ISIS is brutal. ISIS is un-Islamic. And the point is, we call it the Breaking the ISIS Brand Counter-Narrative Project. And the point is to reach people that are looking for ISIS or watching that kind of film, to hopefully that they think that our film is one of those, because we give them names that sound like ISIS. We use the thumbnail from the ISIS B-roll, and that they watch ours and they go, oh, wow, this is a guy that feels like me, discriminated against, angry, pulled into this jihadi narrative, and wow, it doesn't look like it worked out so good for the guy.
I want to get back to the, again, I tell people are important. They will know a jihadi who is really contemplating a new act or joining ISIS can actually see these and not begin to question the choice. So that's where I think they're incredibly powerful. And I do want to say thank you to you and your team. Incredibly good. I do want to get back to this article because, again, I think there is so much important about this. I don't want us to forget about these children in these camps, because that's primarily, I think, what you want to have the focus. I think the focus needs to be on, if we're going to talk about children, You do like you have some very, very important information in these articles. One of the things you also mention is the numbers are here. They are extremely fluid. So I know you just gave us an estimate, but of how many were in the camps. But how many children are we now talking about?
Oh my, now I lost track of that. It's in the article, but I can't remember the exact numbers. But I can tell you 371 of them died last year from malnutrition, disease, and now they're facing COVID. But I think it's something like 4,000. It's in the article. I'm sorry, I lost track.
I was kind of impressed with. We don't even think about the concept of fluid, but these numbers are they're changing, and she's the kids are dying at an alarming rate due to this malnutrition part, and it's alarming to Western society. It might not be alarming to anybody else, but the thought of kids dying is alarming to us as a whole. So.
And that's a point that we need to keep in mind. We're talking about our children. These are our people. You know, we call them foreign terrorist fighters, but they're actually our citizens. And they went to Syria and they crossed the border, the most of them illegally. So usually you get tried for the crime that you do in the country that you do it. But if you entered a country illegally and they didn't even want you there, and now they're trying to send you home to be prosecuted, that's a little bit different situation. But the children are our children, they're our citizens. And if our society is a good society, we should want to protect our children, no matter what kind of criminal their mother or father happens to be.
You also mentioned some of the difficulties and dangers facing these children besides malnutrition. Can you talk about those, please?
Well, there's ISIS enforcers that would love to pull them in and teach them to be haters, and they teach their own children to throw rocks at the ones that walk away from ISIS and to attack them. They would love to pull them into that ideology. These ISIS enforcers put tents on fire, stab people, kill people. There's also, there's now vaccinations in the camps, but a lot of the mothers are afraid of the vaccinations because you know, it's not amazing medical quality. There's bad water in the camps, there's bad air. I have reactive asthma, and sometimes I find it hard to breathe when the wind blows up the dust, and there's a lot of oil and oil products in the air. So it's, and it gets really hot. It gets as hot as 50 degrees centigrade, so that's over 100 here. And there's no air conditioning in these tents. In the winter, they're freezing cold. Some of them have space heaters, but Huda Mathana didn't have a space heater with her kid that has this chronic bronchitis. And the grandparents are living here in the States. They would love to take that child back to safety. Let's see. There's also the rain comes into the tents and it's freezing cold in the winter. There's disease. There's children that have died of typhoid and mothers that have died of typhoid. Now they're facing COVID. It's just a mess.
One of the other things your article does that I do want to give you some praise for is it examines the one thing many of us know but need to hear about. You talk about the legal status of the ISIS children versus the adults. Can you, Dr. Speckhard, can you please share with our listeners these basic truths?
Okay, well, no Western democracy holds a child responsible for the crimes of their parents. And we oftentimes refer to that as collective punishment. So, and a lot of these kids that were born in ISIS territory because of their parents' citizenship do have a right to citizenship in their home countries. And some of them came already having passports issued to them. So, you know, there's a little girl that lived in Belgium that her video is also up on our YouTube channel. And it's just heartbreaking. I mean, she went to school in Belgium and now she's in Camp Rouge. It's horrible. So they are not guilty of crimes unless we're talking about the older kids. But the older kids are not in the camps with their mothers. They're actually in prisons.
It's a big important issue. Unfortunately, like I said, what I like, I should say not unfortunately, but I like the way you divide this up, because when in general this gets discussed, they don't look at all the issues. Again, that's what I think is extremely important about the article that you and Dr. and Ms. Ellenberg published. I'm just impressed. As I stated in the beginning, one of the things I love about the article, again, is you raise all these issues. The article talks about those women who married an ISIS jihadi and what happened to them if he died in combat. But even more difficult, what does that mean for the children? Dr. Speckhard, could you explain a little bit more about this also for our listeners?
Okay, well, this is also important. You get your citizenship from your mother and your father. So let's imagine that there's a Syrian woman and she was married to a Syrian fighter and she's got 2 Syrian kids. And then she, all the women, if they lost their husband in fights or aerial bombardments or those kind of things, they had to move to a Madafa, that's an ISIS guest house. And they were basically, the only way they could get out of that Madafa was to marry another ISIS guy. And so they have serial marriages. A lot of them have 3, 4 marriages. And so imagine then she marries a German and she has 2 kids with the German. And dead or alive, those kids have a right to German citizenship and they have a right to be repatriated to Germany. But, you know, can she go as their mother? Can her 2 Syrian kids go? So do you just separate families? And also, they were given birth certificates by ISIS. The UN is now urging countries to take those documents seriously. ISIS did document things very, very carefully, but their own way. I mean, it's an ISIS birth certificate, but, you know, usually accurate. But there's mothers that might have 3 different kids from 3 different fathers. So would they get repatriated to 3 different countries and with or without their mothers? And then there's also the issue of, in Europe, if you repatriate children that have parents, and this is mothers and fathers, the mother or father can, under the EU constitution, petition for family unity and say that they want to come back. So that's one of the reasons that Europe doesn't want to repatriate these children, because they know it might mean opening the door to ISIS mothers and fathers coming home. And some countries don't have good terrorism laws, so they're not confident that they can prosecute and put the people in prison or in a rehabilitation program if they need it. And then other countries have terrible prison situations. Like France right now has a lot of radicalization in their prisons, so they're not exactly welcoming ISIS guys into their prison. And France has sent some of the people that are in prisons in Syria, some of the men, to be tried in Iraq, which caused an outcry because they will probably get the death penalty.
Again, this is just it kind of kitty bags, and this is I'm this whole concept. I mean, again, all of these issues that do not get raised, and I'll keep thanking you throughout this article, because this interview, because I haven't found anything else that discusses all this. One of the reasons why I love your work. So let me go one more. It says, your article actually takes this and really and develops these issues. Develops the explanation of why there are so many issues. You talk about ISIS children, and we talk about the sanctity of the family unit. We fight to have the sanctity of the family unit respected and protected throughout civilization. But in respect to ISIS children, your article mentions barriers, and you've mentioned some of those. Can you tell us a few more about these barriers that make it difficult?
Sure. There's political barriers. So like one of the things that we started doing at the end of all my ISIS interviews, when I saw these situations, I decided I didn't want to change the research at all. But at the end that I would ask the person, and I always ask them now, Do you want to go home? If they say yes, you understand if you go home, probably you would be prosecuted. That would be the only way your country would take you back. And you might spend time in prison. They say, yes, I understand that. That's what I want. It's better than here. And then I say, have you had a visit from your country authorities? And some of them say some spy types came and talked to me, but I don't even know what country they were from, or, you know, it was from US or it was from UK, but it wasn't my country, or yes, I've talked to my intel guys. And then have you talked to anyone else from your country? And would you like me to give this interview to your justice authorities in the hopes that maybe they would decide that you could be brought home and prosecuted, but I can't make any promises. And I'm not a lawyer. I always make very clear I'm not a lawyer. I can't give any legal advice. And almost everybody says, absolutely. Give this interview and they can view the video that you took of me. I would like them to see it. And sometimes we go over, you know, you've admitted to being a member of ISIS, you've admitted to this and this and this, you know, that's for sure going to be used against you when you go home. And they say, I want to be prosecuted at home. I want to be, I want to go home to my country and serve my time there. And a lot of them have given up ISIS, I should say, you know, and they sound pretty convincing that they gave up ISIS. They're disillusioned of it. But I worked primarily with Germans on 21 cases, but I worked with other countries on some of these cases where we took the notes to them and met with the federal prosecutor, met with the police, went through it all. And what the Germans told me is, our politicians keep asking us, are we confident that we can prosecute? Because they don't want to bring back ISIS men and women that could end up on the streets. And so the barrier for bringing anybody back, including the children, is, are we going to face ISIS men and women, dangerous people on the streets that could attack us, that could hurt us? Because a politician has to think, you know, if I bring 5 ISIS children and then I have to bring their mothers with them, and one of them ends up in a suicide vest and blows herself up on the subway, I'm not going to get reelected. And that's how politicians think. You know, what are the risks? What are the benefits? Or if I bring back 5 ISIS children and I have to bring their mothers with them to bring the kids back, or in the future they're going to get back here somehow, and all the public is against that, and they don't even have pity for these children, I'm not going to get reelected. So a lot of it is politicians kind of feeling the pulse of their countries. So Shamima Begum, for instance, she had a baby that was born and she took him back into Camp Rouge. And I had written to the country authorities in UK and said, I've been in Camp Rouge and I can guarantee you that baby's not going to live. And I said, if you need somebody to carry the baby home, I'll be glad to do it. And because I think it was Jack Straw, I don't remember who it was, the Home Secretary said that he deemed it too dangerous to send consular staff to go and get that baby, and the baby died. So, but if you look at anything, if I ever post anything about Shamima Begum, people go crazy on social media saying that monster, we hate her, none of us want her back. And politicians are looking at that too and saying, you know, it's not worth it to me. Why should I have any pity on an ISIS child? And Shamima's an adult, but she left at age 15. So she was a minor when she left.
Wow. And I like that these are difficult, difficult things to actually address, but you actually do that, and thank you again. One of the other things that you talk about is if repatriation happens, while you're not saying it's an end-all be-all type thing, you are saying if it happens, you talk about rehabilitation or a facilitation to re-enter society as a whole. Could you talk a little bit more about that, please, Dr. Speckhard?
Sure. And I do think it is an end-all and be-all. These are little children, for the most part. And who among us really wants it on our conscience that we closed the doors to little children and closed our hearts to little children and said, you can't come back to this country where you can get a solid meal, where you can get vaccinated with a safe vaccine, where you hopefully won't get COVID or typhoid or all the other things that are killing you, and you won't have to face ISIS people threatening your life and your mother's life. But if we bring these kids back, depending on whether we bring them with their mothers or not, I mean, a lot of people, and the SDF included, are nervous about doing separations between mother and child. And our view on that is, if the child's in grave danger, what these children are, you have to act in the best interest of the child. And that's the basis of most of the treaties about protection of children, that you always act in the best interest of the child. So generally, you try to keep children and their parents together. But if the only way you can save a child's life is to remove them from their parent, you should do it. And then secondly, if you decide to keep mothers and children together, you have to be looking at that mother. And you know, certainly if she took her kid into ISIS knowingly, and knowing what ISIS was, that's an act of abuse or neglect. So you might, at some point, sever custody or have oversight to make sure that she's no longer of that mindset. But there's plenty of mothers that were in ISIS and have walked away from it. So there's a German woman that Peter Galbraith helped bring back to Germany with her child. The child's now in school, doing fine. The mother has no interest in ISIS. She hasn't been prosecuted yet, and she probably won't be, because there's no interest to prosecute her. She's not dangerous, and she's not interested. And I've talked to other women in these camps that their family members were tortured, killed, imprisoned by ISIS. They hate ISIS. I mean, they went knowingly, but at this point, they hate ISIS. So if you bring these kids back, you have to think, is their parent capable and good to take care of them? You know, if they're going to be indoctrinating them in ISIS hate ideology, you probably need to separate them from their parent. And then you have to do a 360 around them. You have to get the school to work with them. You have to get acceptance in the community so that the other kids aren't calling the kid names, so that the other parents trust him to come and play at their house. You have to do a health assessment. You have to do psychology and social work. You have to think of every aspect, and you have to watch this kid over time. But kids are malleable. And kids adjust to their situation, and they thrive when they're nurtured.
It's very truthful. We do all of the things you're pointing out. We currently do in the United States to protect children. New York, in all the states in the United States of America, your teachers are what's called mandated reporters. I was one of those. If we see abuse or neglect, we are required to report it. We're required to make sure that somebody acts on it.
And that's what I'm asking for. Well, I'm going to have to wrap it up. So I would just say in parting that if we don't rescue these ISIS kids, if we don't bring them home, it's not like they're going to disappear. The older they get, the more they're aware, and the more that they can get traumatized and hurt and angered and pulled into a really sick ideology. And we may see them as the next generation of terrorists, and that's completely preventable. And repatriation is a good way to go on that.
Thank you very much for your time. Send me, I know you sent me the link. If you could just send it to me one more time, and please do not stop your work. It's drastically important for civilization as a whole at this point, because we need to hear all the angles on this. We need to continue to hear them, because no one's presenting it. I do a lot of reading, and I have not seen anything so well developed and examined. So thank you. And tell Ms. Ellenberg, thank you very much. I really appreciate her work also.
I will. She's soon to be Dr. Ellenberg. We're working
Yay!
So thank you so much.
God bless.